their lives as the new photo, this second photo, depicts love and reconciliation and was the result of having regret. Regret is a powerful emotion, and it's common to us all. Looking back at our younger selves, we likely would recall something we've done or failed to do, and thus led to our feelings of regret. We may regret our moral failings, right along with our failures to embrace positive opportunities. And though we attempt to forget the things that cause us to feel regret, as Hazel's story demonstrates, if we're willing to learn from our actions and our inactions, then regret can be a powerful teaching tool. In the book, The Power of Regret, Daniel Pink writes that when one is willing to learn from regret, then we will make smarter decisions, improve relationships, and enjoy more meaningful lives. Daniel writes that regret is a tool that helps us learn. It's adaptive. And though our culture has embraced positivity, negative emotions are valuable. Daniel acknowledges that we don't have the power to change the past, but we can go forward, especially when we regret bullying someone or standing by while someone else was bullied. The power of regret is that we can then go forward, trying to treat everyone with a greater degree of kindness than we did before. Thinking about the power of regret, return to the Gospel of Luke. Jesus told a parable to some people who claimed they were righteous and they didn't have any regrets, and thus they trusted in themselves and regarded others with contempt. Jesus says, "From this group of righteous persons, one of the men, a Pharisee, stood apart from the others. He chose this position because he believed he was pure and righteous, and he didn't want to stand with any impure sinners. Standing alone, the Pharisee began to pray, 'God, I thank you that I am definitely not like those other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even that tax collector over there.' Clearly, this Pharisee has zero regrets. Meanwhile, the tax collector, who was standing far off, embarrassed to even look up to heaven, was beating his chest and saying simply, 'God, be merciful to me, a sinner.' In contrast to the Pharisee, this person who collected road taxes and income taxes likely overcharged his neighbors and built his wealth by colluding with their Roman oppressors. He is filled with regret, especially as he would not be welcomed by his family, and tax collectors rarely had friends, so he recognizes that only God can grant him mercy. Whereas the Pharisee in Jesus' parable believed in his own ability and power, the tax collector sought a right relationship with God and was humbled as he desired God's grace. Clearly, the power of regret holds the ability for transformative power. Still, though regret can be helpful, it is valuable to understand that we don't remain stuck with our feelings of guilt or judging ourselves too harshly. One of the challenges Hazel shared in an interview is that after receiving Elizabeth's pardon, she still mentally beat herself up. This interview reminded me that it's important that we don't shrug off our regrets, yet we can't let them overtake us either. Returning to the tax collector in Jesus' parable, they viewed themselves as a sinner, as someone unworthy to even look toward heaven and pray. Yet Jesus declared that with their confession, the person was humbled inside their heart, and therefore the tax collector was exalted. These are truly shocking words to Jesus' audience and possibly us, yet it is wonderfully revealing God's transformative ability. Tax collectors in that time frame essentially betrayed Israel, and by extension, they betrayed God. In the conclusion of the parable, Jesus reveals that God's grace removes this sinful stain because God can see the person's heart and knows their true intent. In Psalm 139, the psalmist asserts this idea that God knows us in our deepest selves, writing, "Lord has searched me and known me and discerns my thoughts." God knows us in our core, which can be comforting because wonderfully God knows us so well that God is familiar with our sorrow and our regrets. Equally, God is familiar with our joy and relief after being reconciled with others, which allows us to be liberated from our regrets. especially when we give ourselves permission to leave regret behind and allow the forgiveness from others to be our own forgiveness of self. To take an honest look at the past, confess, seek reconciliation with others and self, which leads to forgiveness. This can be our transformation with God's presence. Granted, the parable doesn't speak about the tax collector's healing or forgiveness, but it speaks of his regret while trusting God completely. The tax collector asks to be forgiven, and as a request, it is a hope not on the expectation that God would forgive him, but in hope where the person cared to be right with God. Humbly, he sought to do the right thing. Perhaps if there were a part 2 to the parable, maybe the tax collector discovered God's redeeming grace and reaction to this goodness was to treat people more kindly, perhaps even giving back the excess collected and allowing the transformation of God into their life. Ironically, maybe part 2 does appear, for the story of Zacchaeus appears shortly after this. Are the two combined? We don't know. Did Jesus have that in mind when he told this parable? We don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus' teachings provide for his followers the ability for us to seek the righteousness and heart of God, so as not to do the things that would fill us with regret, but to acknowledge that when we have moments of regret, we can seek out God's face, and we can seek out reconciliation with each other, and we can seek through humility our ability to help others become restored while we ourselves are restored. Our ability to look backward helps us move forward into a glorious future as faithful followers of Jesus Christ.